Hi, it's Roland and welcome back to Practical Plastic. So today I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. Now, topic for today's segment is going to be building and painting strategies. Always a challenge with a kit is trying the best way to coordinate your building and your painting. Obviously, you need to do both to get to your finished product. So, what I've done, I've pulled out three kits that I've done, and what we're going to do is take a look at these, and I'll talk about the different strategies I've used in doing the coordinating the building and painting to get down to a finished product. So, reason I bring this up, um, you know, I try to gear all my videos for those of us who are casual builders or for people who are coming new to the hobby. And one thing that you may see on a lot of the real, I mean, the don't get me wrong, they do phenomenal work, but the real detail oriented builders, the real enthusiast builders. And commonly what we'll see in those is when it comes time to build, every part comes off a sprue, every part goes on an alligator clip and a stick, and you see this forest of sticks and clips and pieces, and everything is getting airbrushed and then assembled afterwards. At a certain level of experience, fine. And like I said, this is not meant to be any negative to that. But again, for people who are new to the hobby or for those of us who are casual builders, um, to that, I would say don't believe that that is the way you have to go to get a good result. Particularly, I would say to that, item number one, especially if you are new to the hobby, do not, do not remove all of your parts from the sprues before you do the build. I've built a lot of models. I am pretty good with mechanical things, spatial relations. I have a knack for that. Okay, it's fine. Good for me. Yay, whatever. The reason I bring that up is I am pretty comfortable looking at a piece, seeing it in the instructions, let's say, and understanding that in space it looks this way, but looking at it from a different perspective, it looks that way. That is not always the easiest thing to do. And if you remove all of your parts from the sprues before you build anything, you may very well be pulling the wrong pieces into the wrong spots and have yourself a big problem as you go forward in your building. So, again, for the beginning hobbyist, keep the parts on the sprues. There are some parts that are real obvious as to what they are. The hood off of a car, but for the majority of your pieces, leave them be. Certainly, if you are moving into a subject matter you have never worked with before, keep the parts on the sprues. You will thank yourself later for doing that. The second thing is when it comes to the painting, you do not need to paint every single piece before you start assembly. And I'm going to talk about that as I go through these three examples. But you will see that in some cases, it is very much in your interest to do some building beforehand and then do some painting. How you approach that is going to depend on what you were building and the final color scheme you look to achieve. And then you can evaluate, and I will talk about that as I go through these. So, that's going to be the topic for the day. I'm going to take that camera and we'll take a closer look at these. But in the meantime, as always, thank you for watching, subscribing. Please hit that alert, like, share, all the good YouTube stuff. So, I'm going to grab that camera and we'll get right down to this. Okay. Okay, so these are the three kits we're going to take a look at. The MPC Pontiac GTO, which I just finished. The Trumpeter hemp tractor that is a 1/35th scale. That's why it's a little bit smaller, which I did way early in the channel. And behind them, that monster, the AMT Autocar dump truck. Another one from earlier in the channel, but quite a build. All right, so let's talk about these and different approaches for the three. All right. Okay, so for our initial look, we'll do some examination of sprue painting. Now, there have been some very decided opinions about sprue painting that I've encountered in my own travels through build videos on YouTube. And basically the major complaint against, or the major criticism of sprue painting is the problem of when it's time to remove your parts, you will now have the nub marks where you could not paint because the plastic was there. Now you have cut the piece loose and now you have a nub mark. You have exposed plastic. So my answer, or my take on that is, well, yes and no. You know, like everything in life, nothing is perfect. But there is certainly some validity to the criticism of sprue painting and the issue of nub marks when, and to me this is the key point, when you are going to have nub marks in places that are, one, in very open view, and two, the covering of which will become readily apparent. So you'll notice here I painted the hood for this car off sprue. And why is that? Well, the attachment points for this hood are right up top at the sill of the hood, which meant when I cut the hood, it would have been pretty clear that I had done touch-up painting there. So that I want to avoid. Now, same with the engine. But looking at my other parts, let's take the wheels for instance. Okay, this is white, flat white on white plastic, so it'll be not as apparent. But when you are considering a painting approach with a sprue painting method, it's very important, and this is I think the gist of this technique in making it work in a reasonable fashion in the build of a kit. Look at where your attachment points are. Now, the attachment points for these wheels are all on the rim of the wheel, which are going to sit either in the bead of the tire or barely exposed, which means when I do my touch-up paint after removing these, they will not be very visible, and because I'm doing white on white, will not be very, color-wise, will not be optically apparent. So those will disguise away. Now, for a lot of these other pieces here, they are on sprue. This is a flat black. Obviously, I have to cut the dashboard off, but look at the attachment points. They are on the bottom ledge of the dashboard, and it's just on the ledge itself. So when I flat black that with my brush and it sits in the car, you're never going to see that. So what is the harm of painting it on the sprue? I have a nice handy holder for my part, no problem. Now for some other pieces, looking at these, now here we have a flat black under, and I did a light blue paint over it. And there's a nice big attachment point, which is going to mean a nice big nub mark. Likewise for this tie rod here. However, those 2 points, I put my steel paint on, you're never going to notice that they were pulled off. These, it may not be quite as easily disguised. However, these are springs in the suspension of the car. Because they attach with round pegs, I can turn that piece when I locate it in the car, so that nub spot is as far removed from readily being visible as possible. So again, Yes, there will be nub marks. Yes, the coverage paint may be a little noticeable, but noting how they attach, it doesn't become an issue anymore. Now, one of the biggest things with sprue painting that will create problems is chrome, because at least to my knowledge, there really is not a paint that will readily, that you can brush on, that will readily give you this kind of chrome finish. And that's always going to be a problem. Two facets to that reality. Some kits are molded with what are referred to as undergates, meaning the gate of the part, which is basically where the nub attachment is coming in, comes in under the visible part of the piece. So rather than the nub coming straight in, you cut it, and now right in open view you have the nub mark. The gate comes in, let's say, on the bottom ledge. So you cut this, and now your nub mark is down here where it can't be seen. So if you do need to touch this up, if that's not actually going to be a gluing surface, if that is exposed, let's say it's like this sitting on an engine, right? You'd have to look underneath to see it. So that is where kit engineering can come into play, and where kit engineering can be very much appreciated. Now, I recently built the Chevrolet Fleetmaster Aero Sedan from Galaxy Models. I noted in that video that almost all of the chrome parts were undergated. I built a little bit earlier than that. I built the Honda Monkey motorcycle from Tamiya. All the chrome was undergated. And I have also noted in several of the Gundam builds that I've done for the channel, many of the parts are undergated, so that when you cut, no nub mark visible. So that's great. Obviously, you can't always rely on a manufacturer doing that for yourself. It certainly seems to be something more in practice in modern molding in older kits. Now, this kit was originally tooled, I'm guessing, sometime back in the 1970s. You're not going to find undergating here. It's going to be traditional gate in straight to a surface of the part. So it's something you have to work with, but something that you can easily accommodate and work around so that nobody's ever going to know once the kit is assembled. Now, some things to consider as well with sprue painting is that because you choose to do a sprue painting technique, whatever you want to call it, it's semantic nonsense at this point. But if you choose to paint parts while they're on the sprues or the runners, let's say, always look at what you can assemble to eliminate sprue points that you need to, nub marks that you need to cover up later. Again, back to our engine. So this consists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces, this assembly. And those all would have been nub marks that would have had them been covered up. But by doing a pre-assembly, they're all gone. So the paint that I did for, in this case, the engine, that coverage and that color, everything is consistent because it was done after the assembly. So there we go. It's all done. Likewise, for this roll cage, the separate parts that went into it, and this I did by hand brush, so that's all consistent. And really, when you're doing a sprue painting technique, this is the thing you want to consider, is the consistency of your finish, because the nub marks will create, as I said, that inconsistency. Another thing too, to mitigate your nub marks, when you remove the piece from the sprue, make sure you clean up the plastic of the nub mark itself. So whether you're whittling it down with a knife, sanding it down with some type of sanding stick, make sure that nub mark is flush, so that when you go to paint, you're not painting over a bump in the part or a jagged area on the part, which will make it very obvious at that point. that it was painted before being removed from the sprue. So that's that technique in a nutshell. All right. All right. Second thing to look at in terms of painting and building strategy, I'm going to refer back to the build I did for this AMT Autocar dump truck, namely addressing the different ways to tackle painting in the detailed frame on this kit and getting the two-tone on this dumper body, because as you can see, there is a lot going on here and things we want to do. Now you can see here right off the bat there are nub marks on these step ladders, and as I was just talking about with a more of a strict sprue painting approach, here we have two nub marks and they are quite apparent. Can you see him now? And not to be a wise guy, but to the point of, here was a case where I didn't worry about those nub marks because the truck is typically going to be seen as you would a vehicle on its tires. And maybe if I flip and look at the underbody, that's fine. But especially with the ability for the truck, the dump body to tilt up, we get to see plenty of the frame there. And with removal of the hood, plenty of the detail there. So there is no pressing reason to really worry about those nub marks underneath. So there you go. Okay, so here we see the parts of the dump truck frame laid out for assembly. Now, in this case, certainly you could look at that and say, well, why not paint them ahead of time? Well, in this case, this is an older kit, and this is an older mold, as you would expect. So what you have to consider in situations like this is how well these parts are going together. Now, to the kit's credit, the locator marks, the locator pins for all of these pieces were apparent. They located well. The problem is in what's going on with these molds since they're old. And with these pieces, there were issues with warp. There were issues with mold steps. There was a lot of finesse involved to get these pieces to get together correctly. Now, had it been painted ahead of time, if I had painted before building, I would have had to do all of that working around the paint, which would have meant a lot of damage to the paint and a lot of touch-up to do, and this is not working to advantage at this point. So before you make your decision as to pre-assemble or pre-paint, again, look at your parts, see how well they're going together. Now, speaking of the parts, looking at the dump body, these were the side panels for the dump body, and as you can see, they are just flat panels because the side ribbings were molded here as separate pieces. So this makes making the two-tone paint right off the bat, that's a doable project because you don't have to mask everything to get those ribs. And here in pre-paint assembly, you can see now the frame and the undercarriage is all built up, and the dump body also has been built up. The dump body is basically just an open box, but again, without that ribbing on there, it was very easy to go on that dump body and mask and counter mask to get the light green on the outside, silver in the bed, black underneath, and then I could go separately, paint those side ribs green, the dark green, and we'll see that in a moment. As far as the chassis goes, as you can see in white, it's much easier to appreciate the complexity of the surfaces that need to be painted here. So if you do this type of pre-assembly, just be careful when you paint to capture all your different angles to get full coverage. because now when we look at it after initial paint, we can see how things are looking. Now I'm going to start with the dump body and the side ribs. So now indicating the dump body up top, you can see that light green on the side. That's just a nice, simple, flush surface spray. Likewise, the ribs, lower center, just laid that piece down, painted the dark green. And in the upper right corner, indicating the chassis, it's difficult to see because it's black, but all that surface area now has been covered in spray. It just took a few passes and getting that set up. Now here in assembled form, we can see, even though the paint job on the frame may not be perfect, you don't notice it. And as far as the dump body goes, now with those side pieces attached, it looks like it just came that way. And really, this is what you want to consider for an end result, is to have your kit built and not have it obvious how you went and did your paint strategy. All right, so now that we talked about the AMT Autocar and the paint and build approach for that, we can look at this little beauty, the Trumpeter Hemp Tractor that I did early on in my channel. And to contrast a little bit the approach for this versus the AMT dump truck to get this final appearance. So let's take a look at that. All right, so looking at the parts in this kit, it's a whole lot of great plastic. But as we can see from the color guide, in this case, they give you several different examples of camo schemes, but from the get-go, I knew I wanted to do this kit in the desert khaki. So I knew all my parts were going to be in that off-tan color. So despite how many pieces are on those sprues, the fact that many of them were undergated, and looking at the way the locator pins were set up and how the kit would assemble, I decided I'm just going to spray everything on the sprue right from the start and basically make my kit molded in color. And here we see how the parts started out. This is the gray that the pieces were molded in. I then went with a black primer or undercoat to give some depth and shadow to the final color, which was this Tamiya Deck Tan. Now, with this color, because it was a Tamiya spray, I was able to match it with a bottle color. So even the nub marks that wound up being apparent, I could very easily touch them up. And here, as with the dump truck and final assembly of this hemp tractor, where are the nub marks? And again, that is the point. Now with this, it's obvious that this is all one color, but still you want to make sure that you don't have obvious points that show that, oh, you sprayed and then you removed the parts and assembled. And by color matching the spray and the bottle, now the touch-ups are not apparent. Okay, so there's a look at different ways to approach your build and your painting. So what is the final point of all of that? Is there a final takeaway from all that? Well, yes, there is, and it's the most obvious thing, and you can probably guess already, which is whenever you are looking at your build and trying to decide how you're going to coordinate your building and your painting, your best reference are the kit instructions. Simple as that. Now, whether, as with the MPC GTO, it is just a simple fold-out sheet, or in the case of the Autocar dump truck, if it is a much larger and somewhat confusing instruction sheet, or in the case of the hemp tractor, if it's a case of a whole actual booklet for all its parts, it's all the same thing. You need to understand how your kit is going together to figure out an effective way to implement your painting in the building scheme, no matter which way it is. And that's why I picked these three kits to talk about this whole point. With the MPC Superstocker, I pretty much did all the painting before assembly, aside from the roll cage and a little bit of the chassis and engine. For the Hempt tractor, I didn't even take a part off the sprue. Everything was done right on sprue because it's a monochrome build. You know, it's all in the tan. And also, to its benefit, a lot of undergating, which meant a lot less nub marks to deal with. The Autocar dump truck, a more complicated paint scheme, but because looking at the instructions and the parts and seeing the way the kit went together, doing the two-tone for the side of the dump body, the hood, all of these things, started to see how I could paint those with the least amount of effort, or I should say the greatest ease, and still end up with what is a fairly, I don't want to say fairly complicated, but an interesting paint scheme, being that it's two-tone rather than just doing a color for the cab and a color for the bed. So, as always, instructions matter. So, in some videos, and again, I don't mean to cast aspersions, but in some build videos, it seems that builders take a certain pride in saying, oh, I didn't, you know, who needs the instructions, just build it. I'm not that kind of person. Even if I look at something and I have an idea of how it goes together, I want to look at some kind of reference material to see that I'm not missing anything. And that's just the way I am. So, but I have found in my building that typically when I run into a problem between painting and building, in this case, mostly per the building, is because either I did not interpret something correctly or instructions were misleading. Now, in a lot of my build videos, you may have noticed that I don't necessarily build in sequence, and when I deviate from the actual build sequence in the instructions, I try to point that out. But the other thing you can note in your instructions, in combination with how you're going to develop your painting strategy, is you can see what things you could assemble in parallel. Like you may be able to build up some suspension elements, build up some engine elements, build up some interior elements, maybe even do some exterior body detail, and have all of these things kind of going at the same time while you're going in between and painting. There's a reason a lot of times in my videos I mention highlighter to mark off your parts and your steps as you complete them so you don't miss something. But end of story, don't underestimate the value of your kit instructions in terms of figuring out how to do your painting in conjunction with your building. So, all that said, I'm just going to add one little postscript about detail painting and using different colors to bring out some details. And then that's it. I'm going to wrap this up. So again, thank you for watching. I'll be back with another build. In the meantime, as always, enjoy your hobby. When looking at colors with my kits, and if you've seen in some of my other build videos, a lot of times I talk about using contrast to bring out detail or accentuate detail and give the overall appearance of greater detail. So a lot of that comes from, I don't like the idea of having, you know, detail on parts or putting detail into parts and then you can't really see it in the finished kit. And if colors are too similar or there's too much of a single color, that's what's going to happen. I don't want my builds to look like, you know, clown cars with, you know, a paisley assortment of colors, but I do want, with just a casual look, to be able to see, oh, this is going on, that's going on, and have the various details a little more apparent.